welcome back to the Vanier Woodshop. I'm Mr. Daganowicz. Today we're going to talk about our table saw. So we are lucky in this shop. We have a couple saw stops. We're going to talk first about our ripping saw stop, and then we're going to talk about our crosscut saw stop later. So when we look at the table saw, it's not just a clever name. It is a saw that has a big table. And again, we have another fence. So we've talked a lot over the last 3 or 4 videos about our tables and our fences, our blades and our guards. So we still have our same piece of white oak that we're using. We're going to cut that in a minute. But first we're going to talk a little bit about how you set this saw up. So before we even turn it on, we're going to look at where we want our guards and everything to be. So the 3 main safety features that we have, and I'm going to wind this really high so we can see them quite easily. But we of course have our blade, which is the big part that spins around that does the cutting. We then have this piece here. This is our splitter. What it does is when we're cutting pieces of wood, as the machine cuts it, it keeps one side on one side and the other side on the other. It stops the wood from squeezing together if it has tension in it, pinching the blade and causing kickback. That's something we definitely don't want. The second feature we have are these little guys right here. They move up and down. They're called anti-kickback fingers. The way they work is when they slide in, they end up grabbing, and then as it pulls back, these will grab into the wood and we won't actually be able to move it. So they catch and it stops the kickback from happening the same way. It'll mar up our wood, but that's okay. And the last one that just fell down, this is our guard. So this is always down when we're cutting. It prevents us from having a finger go into the side of the guard or into the side of the blade. So we're going to set the height of this blade right now. Now, if we look at this, this looks like the blade is way too high, and that's because the blade is way too high right now. So what we want, the number that we're looking for, is about 5 millimeters or 1/4 inch above the top of the stock. Another easy way to look at that is we want to set it so we're about 1 tooth. So if we look at this right here, we can see that we have about 1 tooth above the saw. So that was done on this dial on the front. We're about 1 tooth above. The main reason that we always did that in the old way, or on older table saws historically have been the most dangerous saw in a wood shop. This is now probably the safest saw in my wood shop because it has saw stop technology. What that means is if this comes in contact with something conductive, like metal or human, us, there's a computer inside that's constantly reading and looking for conductivity. Within, don't quote me, but I believe it's 3 milliseconds, this thing will stop. Basically a cartridge will fire into the back of the blade, jamming this so that it stops dead. At the same time, it's actually going to fire another cartridge, which makes the blade drop out of sight. It's super awesome. It's wonderful. But back when we didn't have that, we'd always keep that low enough that if we did end up cutting ourselves, we wouldn't cut all the way through the finger, because it's way easier for a doctor to reattach a finger that hasn't completely detached from your body. Now, all of that sounds gruesome and gross, and it is. That will never happen again on this saw because our school district has been gracious enough to get us these saws that are way safer. So we've set our blade height. We know that our splitter's in place. We've got our kickback fingers. We're going to put our guard down. We don't need to look at our blade anymore. We now have our fence, which we're going to line up using this ruler on the side. So I know that this piece of wood is exactly 73 millimeters right now, which is about 2.5 inches wide. I'm going to cut it to 65. So I'm going to set it using my guide and bring it right into about 65 millimeters right now. I know then I'm going to make a cut. If we look, we can double check. Yes, for sure, I'm going to cut my material. This guide or this ruler is very accurate. If you're doing something that needs to be perfect, I still would recommend that you double check it using your own ruler. But for 90% of the things we're doing, this guide is super accurate. So we're now set up, we're ready to make our cut. One thing we want to note before we do anything, if it's less than 6 inches or 150 millimeters between the blade and our fence, we want to ensure that we're using push sticks. Again, in normal circumstances, I try and use push sticks always, unless it's something really wide. But in this case, we have our same 2 styles of push sticks. This one will always become my right-handed push stick. I'm going to use this to hook onto the end of the board, and this one's going to be the one that holds me tight to the fence. Now, because when I'm using the table saw, I can't see the blade anymore, I have to trust that the blade's going to do what it does, and it will, but I'm going to make sure that I can see no gap between my material and this white fence. That's why the fence is nice and white. If it moves away at all, it immediately creates a pretty good shadow line. So I'm going to use this push stick. I'm going to hook my thumb just under here, and I'm going to pull it to the side. I'm going to push through using my hand until I get to the point where I'm at about the end of my fence, and then I'm going to grab my push stick and finish the cut. At no point am I going to let go of this material. So what you'll see me do from this side, it'll look something like this. This will be pushing through. I'll probably move my hand to hold it like that so it stops. I'll pick up my push stick and I'll push through. And I'll probably do that a little bit faster when I'm actually making the cut. So I'm ready to cut. The next thing that I need to do is turn my saw on. Now when this saw hasn't been on for a while, it needs to recalibrate and sense and make sure that it's going to check things right. So there's two ways or two systems. So the first one is there's a little switch that we pull up, and it's going to blink a red light. The green light will come on and the red light's going to blink. As long as that red light's blinking, we cannot turn the saw on. I can pull it on, nothing happens. Once this red light stops blinking, I now know that I can turn my saw on. So if I turn it on, it fires up right away. If I shut my saw off, the green light will blink multiple times, which means that I can't actually shut it off and then decide that I want to turn it back on again until my blade has come to a complete stop. So in order to turn it on, we make sure that it is green. Now, just to demo this, and again, we will never do this in real life, but if I need to, or if I show you, so this saw right now is green. If something like wood comes in contact with it, nothing happens. If something like me comes in contact with it and I touch the side of the blade, it immediately blinks red. So that's the saw recognizing, and you can see just how fast that happens. The split second that I touch it, if that was running, this saw would immediately slam in and close down. But, so if that was on, I wouldn't be able to turn my saw on. Now it's off. I know that I'm ready. My blade height is set. My fence is set. My kickback fingers are in place. My guard's down. My splitter's there. I've got my push sticks ready. I'm going to have this one right here. Now, all I need to do is start my saw. I'm going to use this to hold it in. I'm going to push in. Now I'm here. I'm going to hold that. Continue through. Now there's a couple things that you might have noticed when I was making that cut. I didn't stop as soon as my material finished cutting. I had to push that material all the way through so that it was past the blade. What I never want to do is have material stuck and sitting between my blade and my fence. The other thing that you may have noticed, or may not have, I didn't stand directly behind the line of the cut. If kickback happens, what's going to happen is that board is going to fly backwards. If I'm standing here, that board's going to fly right into my hip. It's going to hurt an awful lot. So I always make a habit of standing to the side, so if something were to happen, that board's going to go beside me and out. It's not going to actually catch me. So the table saw is for ripping cuts only. So what that means is that we are moving with the direction of the grain. So we are cutting along the length of the board. This table saw in particular, in my wood shop here at Vanier, this one's only ever used for ripping. We're never going to cross cut on this saw. If we need to cross cut, we can use one of two machines. We have our second saw stop, which we're going to demo right away, and you're going to see that spliced into this video, or we have our miter saw that you can also use. But for now, why don't we head over to the other saw stop and we'll talk about cross-cutting over there. All right, welcome back to the Vanier Wood Shop. We've now moved further into the shop. We're going to talk about the new sliding table saw. So, all right, we're at the sliding compound. Don't say the welcome to. Whatever, Steve. All right, we've moved over to our sliding table saw now. So what you see, it looks almost the same, except we've got this wonderful black thing on the side. This takes the place of what used to be the table saw sleds. This slides incredibly smooth. You can actually use this knob right here to change the angle, and we can do miters and things of that nature. We're just going to talk about a simple crosscut right now. So I've got that tightened in place. This is locked down. So very similar to what we had before. At this point, we're going to get our fence out of our way. We're going to just move it to the side. The one thing you never want to do is double fence or have one fence pushing while another fence is butting up against. That creates a piece of wood that's going to get cut off, be stuck between a fence and a blade, and cause us problems. So you'll notice there's a slightly different guard on this saw. The way you work with this one, you just pull forward, lift up, it sits out of our way. So again, we're going to set the height of our blade using the exact same system, bring it down so that we only have about one tooth or 5 millimeters or 1/4 inch. Now we've got anti-kickback fingers again. We just have a splitter and we have our guard. We're going to put our guard down. It's locked in place. Now, if I need to cut this to length, the wonderful thing about this saw is I can actually set a stop. I can move this along, get a specific measurement. I'm going to say this out loud here. I'm going to tell you every time, don't trust the tape measure on this because it slides really easily. If somebody moves it or bumps it, it's not going to be accurate anymore. So, same thing, we've got our table saw. Now, when we're doing our final cuts or cutting something to length that we care about, what we're going to do is, just like we did when we started breaking this out, we're going to cut a little bit off one end. That's going to allow us to know that we have a square corner that we can use. We're then going to take our measurement and mark it and then cut off the second end. At this point, I've set this stop to be what it is, and that's going to allow us to cut. But all we need to do, we're going to hold our piece of wood tight to our fence. Our fence now moves, and we're just going to push through. It's going to look simply like this. We're going to go all the way past to the side. We're not going to reach over the blade to grab anything. I'll move to the side, get my offcut out of the way. I'll use probably the push stick to do that. Slide this back. I can bring this around. Then I can switch the end, turn it around, and now I'll have my board cut to length. So let's turn the saw on and get that going. So first I'm taking that small piece off. Now I've got my piece to pull out. Turn that around. Now I shut off my saw. Because that piece did stick and stay just in there, it's just resting there. I'm going to leave it till my saw is stopped. I can lift that up, and I'm still going to use a push stick, pull that out of the way, reset my guard for the next person. This has been such a great addition to the wood shop here. It makes cross-cutting so much easier. For those of you that are doing the grade 9 cutting boards, this will change your life as far as how we used to have to make those cuts. For any sort of mitered corners, this is a great system. It works so well, it's so smooth, and it's the safest place to do it now. All right, so that's how we use the crosscut sled on this particular saw. There's a couple more things that we'll talk about really quickly just before we end. One of the things that you can do with a table saw is if you ever needed to cut just a small groove in this board but not cut all the way through. Obviously we couldn't do that with the guard or the splitter in place. We have a separate, it's called a riving knife that goes in place then. That's something I'll show you in person if you ever need to remove this guard. Again, 99% of the time we don't remove this guard. Most of the time when the guard's off, I'll make the cut, but I will show you what that looks like in person. That's not something you can do or I can show over a video. And the last thing that we would talk about is we have our dado blades. So the way the dado blades work, our normal saw is one blade thick. The way a dado blade set works is you end up putting multiple blades and stacking them together. So we have all of these little inserts that sit in between. So you stack two blades on top of each other, and then these squeeze in between, and what you end up with is a really thick cut. So if you ever needed to cut a groove into something, if you were building a shelf and you need to put shelves into the wood, that would be how we would do it. But that, again, I just wanted to show you what the dado blade looks like and let you know that you can do it, but that's something that I'll show you in real life, in person, in class. Thanks for watching this video. Go get 100% on the test.